Since the late 90s, there's been this rising trend in American media. We've seen it in The Simpsons, with its total disrespect of authority, in Fight Club, and its deconstruction of manhood, and probably in the most extreme and recent example, Rick and Morty, a rejection of those good old family values
on which we used to rely.
All these franchises have one thing in common. Well, I mean, actually a lot of things, since pop culture tend to be so self-referential. A sense of hopelessness, a disinterested attitude towards life, and a strong belief that something in our contemporary world is broken, fake, or even a meaningless illusion. And even if it all sounds like a modern trend, it's just the last in a century-long philosophical movement. Welcome to despair. According to the Oxford Dictionary, nihilism, from the Latin word nihil, nothing, is the belief that life has no meaning or purpose, and that religious and moral principles have no values. The term was around since the 1700s, as a way to define those revolutionary currents that question Christian and generally European values. But it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that the word assumed a more modern meaning. You see, if there's one thing that shaped our current way of life, that will definitely be the steam engine. It redefined what work was, how we organized society, and with the second industrial revolution and the introduction of the assembly line, they established capitalism as the winning economic model, bringing standards of living the likes of which not even kings of the past could even imagine. But as all things, even this positivist utopia had its drawbacks. As Charles Dickens would describe in its novels, Victorian age cities were not a fun place to be, especially if you're a children whose little teeny tiny hands and bodies were particularly fitted for delicate jobs. Add to that poor hygienic and living conditions, sprinkle a strict moral code, bake for 60 years and you get yourself a pretty heavy compromise. A Victorian compromise. That's the joke. The weird thing about this compromise is that even if it was a flawed system, it works surprisingly well for the majority of people. It brought technological innovation and scientific discovery way beyond their wildest imagination, and really the only opposition was from intellectuals like Nietzsche, father of the nihilist doctrine, and most of all Marx. And even if all those thinkers would eventually become very influential, their philosophy were appreciated by the public after something. Basically what I'm saying is they were counterculture. It's almost like that painting, Evening on Carl Johan Street by Munch. The intellectual sees the flaw in the system and decide to go against those bourgeoisie who were too busy following their evening ritual to spot the cracks in the wall. The artist is seen as an ostracized individual. And even if they weren't quite right in the beginning of the century, the positivist utopia that Comte was foreshadowing was a proverbial giant with feet of clay. And even the strongest system crumbles if its principle are shaken with enough force. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche announced that the death of God would drag humanity in its darkest and most violent century yet. And it didn't disappoint. World War I changed everything. In the trenches, all previous values died together with the soldiers, taken down by the same technologies produced in those factories used to make automobiles at such great expense of living condition. As Ingrid puts it in its river, and it is there I most see myself in the universe as a compliant thread. The collective experience of death and war made the Western world reconsider its idea of progress. But it wasn't just war that broke the spirits of the modern man. Its beloved science, for instance, the driving force behind progress, was also realizing the real scope of humanity. Remember Copernicus' thesis that the Earth is not the center of the universe and how he relegated our celestial body as just one of the many orbiting the Sun? Meet Charles Darwin, who since 1856 was telling humanity, "Look, sorry I have to break it down to you, but you ain't got a little special snowflake. In fact, you are just little more than a monkey that can use gunpowder." And even beyond biology, physics was also shaken by Einstein's declaration that time and space were relative. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle showed that there are some parts of reality beyond objective measurement, and Gödel's incompleteness theorem that demonstrated that matter itself couldn't ensure its own correctness and completeness. The new generation of writers and poets would be one of lost souls. People like Montale, that's cursed with knowing the true emptiness of not only his profession, but also the world as a whole. As it will put him, maybe one morning, while walking in the glass clean air, arid, turning around, I will see the miracle achieved. Nothingness behind me, the void appeared. The poetical meaninglessness reaches its peak with T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland. Here is no water but only rocks and no water, and the sandy road. As a consequence of the realization that objectivity is not worth seeking, the focus of artistic production moves from the external to the internal subjective world, for its production influenced much of early 20th century literature and art. Even amongst its detractors, there were figures like Italo Svevo that used his ideas in his novels. In his famous Scream, Munch expressed how his existential dread is so deeply rooted in his soul that distorts reality around him as his voices propagate in silence. No one is hearing, nothing is listening, and God sure is not there.